Hello and welcome to the British Food History Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. Today, I am speaking with returning guest Peter Ross. He was on earlier in the season talking about eating out in Georgian London. It's a fascinating chat. Do go and listen to it if you haven't so already. But this week, I'm talking with Peter about the food and drinks related collections at the Guildhall Library in the City of London. Before we start though, remember that Season 10 of the podcast is sponsored by Netherton Foundry. Netherton Foundry are producers of top quality British-made cookery equipment. Nestled in rural South Shropshire, Netherton Foundry, headed by Neil and Sue Curry, take inspiration from the local ironmasters of the 18th and 19th centuries to craft traditional cookware from iron, oak and copper using non-toxic materials. Their cookware is built to last, whether it be their famous prospector pans, of which I am a proud owner, crumpet rings, or their impressive range of outdoor cookware. Actually, I've also just bought their 12-inch griddle with cloche. It seems I can't be trusted on their website. Netherton Foundry ships to several countries outside of the UK, including the USA and Canada, so why not visit their website, netherton-foundry.co.uk, to find out more about their wonderful products. Approved not just by me, but by folks such as Tom Parker Bowles, Diana Henry and Nigella Lawson. Okay, let's get cracking. I am talking with Peter Ross, who was, until very recently, the Principal Librarian at the City of London's Guildhall Library. He is author of the fantastic book called Insatiable Appetites, Eating Out in Georgian London, published by the Bodleian Library last month, May 2026. Today, we are talking about the collections in the Guildhall Library, which is a staggering 600 years old. We mentioned quite a few books and collections, but don't worry, there are links in the show notes, and there will be images of the various treasures that we view and talk about on the accompanying blog post, so please do check that out as well. We talk about the history of the Guildhall Library and how it got some of its collections, such as the Elizabeth David collection, but also some of the lesser known ones, such as the Robert Miller collection. The staggeringly splendiferous feast put on for James I by the merchant tailors. The importance of the author's voice when it comes to writing popular cookery books that stand the test of time. Hannah Glasse's sauerkraut, and Elizabeth David's Fanny Craddock avoidance techniques, amongst many other things. Those listening to the Secret Podcast get some bonus material where we discuss the Hannah Glasse recipes that don't work, the Worshipful Company of Brewers, poisonous pears in pewter pots, and more. I'll be back at the end, but now please enjoy Treasures of the Guildhall Library with Peter Ross. Welcome back to the podcast, Peter.
Thank you.
Now, we were toing and froing via email about organising our conversation about your book, Insatiable Appetites, and you suggested meeting at the Guildhall Library, and I'd had in the back of my mind for quite a long time to do an episode about the Guildhall Library, so we're killing two birds with one stone here. Right. To have a look at some treasures of the Guildhall Library. It might be a name that people have maybe heard of, a library that's reasonably famous, but they might not know too much about it, and certainly might not know about its amazing collection of food and drink related manuscripts and books and things like that. And we're going to look at some of the treasures of the Guildhall Library today, yes. But I thought, well, first of all, to ask about you and your relationship with the Guildhall Library.
Okay. So professionally, I'm a librarian. Mm-hmm. I've tried to avoid most things to do with the professional side of librarianship and concentrate on what I'm interested in.
Good.
I started off as a librarian in my 20s, and I came to Guildhall Library about 26 years ago as an assistant librarian. And I came here because I knew about the collections at that point in relation to history, the history of London.
Yes.
Because Guildhall Library is a library of London history and has a long history itself. So this year, or sort of end of last year and this year, we're celebrating 600 years from its original foundation.
Gosh.
It was founded in 1425 with some money left by Richard Whittington, Dick Whittington, Pentagon
Right.
fame, and another man called William Berry, who were both mercers, both exceptionally wealthy. Whittington had no heirs, so he'd given away lots of his money to charitable purposes, and he left money to the City of London to do sort of what they wanted with, but to found a library at Guildhall to serve a college of priests that had been founded here about a generation before. So that library survived for about 150 years, 130 years, as a library of, we don't know exactly what was in the library. If it's serving a college of priests, it's going to be religious works, probably classical texts, history. The library has a couple of items that are from the medieval library, but they actually had to buy them back in the 19th century because in 1540 or so, the library was confiscated almost as part of the Reformation, confiscated by the Duke of Somerset, who said, I want all the books sent to Somerset House as my private library. And so the library was basically closed down at that point because it was regarded as a religious foundation. There must have been books being collected by the City of London for the use of the staff after that point, but we don't know anything about them until the early 19th century, when a collection was refounded in the 1820s for the staff of the City of London Corporation, which sort of concentrated on the law and history of London for them to use in the administration of the city. And then gradually they allowed the public in. If you could be sponsored by a member of the staff, you could get in to use this. And potentially the medieval library was the same, that there were scholars who came to use it. Thomas More lived just round the corner, and it's possible he came and used the original medieval library. So similarly in the 19th century, gradually the public were allowed in, and then the city built a library, a public library, before the Public Libraries Act, so quite an early library in London for the use of Londoners, and specialised in the history of London. And they've been collecting on that topic for a couple of hundred years now. So it's the biggest collection in the world devoted to the history of a single city. It's a remarkable collection. And for some reason, which we'll probably come to a bit later, it also has this amazing collection of food books. It's a public library open to absolutely everybody. You don't have to be a member. You can come along and look at 99.9% of the material without formality. You have to order it ahead these days because of various reasons. The only thing we won't probably produce for you is Shakespeare's First Folio, because it's
Fair enough.
so exceptionally valuable. There's a copy of Shakespeare's signature here, which we probably wouldn't get out for you. That's probably potentially the most valuable thing in the collection. And there's a copy of Magna Carta that's somewhere in the building.
Right.
But apart from that, there's probably no reason you couldn't see any of our incunabula, our medieval, early printed books, and absolutely everything else. It's open to you to come and have a look at.
Well, that's amazing. Well, we're going to have a look at a few things today. There's a collection of collections in the library, I suppose you could say.
Yes.
So for some well-known writers, maybe some lesser-known writers, but all very important when it comes to the history of food history itself. Everything has a history, including history.
Yes.
And, well, we've both chosen some things from the archives. And I think as we talk about each of these items, we'll learn about how these came to be collected by the library as we go. I think we've picked a good suite of types of documents here and a good breadth of time, hopefully.
Yes.
Shall we have a look?
Yeah, sure.
Let's get on the move. Where should we start?
Should we start with the early material? Perhaps I like to work chronologically. My brain just functions chronologically.
We will go chronologically.
You're a scientist. It probably functions in a completely different way. So these are sort of things that I've chosen to represent the archives of the City of London. So we have here a number of archives, and the most useful for the history of food are the archives of the London livery companies or the guilds of London.
Yes.
Of which there are many associated with food. And they're deposited here. We look after them. The ones we don't look after are the very grand ones, like the mercers and the goldsmiths, who are so wealthy. They've got their own spaces in which to keep them, and their own archivists and librarians.
Okay.
But most of them we have here.
Yeah, because of course there's brewers, there's vintners.
Vintners, grocers, lots and lots of different ones associated with food.
So what have you chosen then?
So I chose two. So these are what we call from the great companies. There are 12 great companies. They're the sort of the oldest ones. The grocers and the merchants, tailors. And the oldest one we've got here are records from the grocers company. And these records they're basically accounts of foods that were bought and payments made sometimes to people who provided those foods from the early 16th century. So this particular volume dates from 1511 to 1521. And it's essentially, because the City of London and the guilds, they like to wine and dine.
Yes.
So they also like to keep careful accounts of where the money's going. So we have records of what they purchased, the sorts of foods that they purchased. So these accounts list those and the prices they paid, and sometimes the exact quantities that they listed. What they don't include is what they did with those ingredients. We don't know what recipes they were making, if they were making anything particular. But they're not unique. You will find account books from this period in other institutions, but this may be potentially the largest collection of accounts of those sorts of purchases from so early. There are some earlier ones that have food listed in them from the 15th century. Gosh. They're few and far between because some of the companies are not old enough to have those, or they've been lost. Obviously, there was things lost in the Great Fire, and we don't know what we've lost. But there probably were some really early ones from maybe as early as the 13th century that have now gone.
Do you get the opportunity, not necessarily with the grocers here, but with any other of the livery companies, about any of the meals eaten or anything?
Just occasionally, if there's an important meal, they do write down what they're eating. Again, not recipes really. So the one that I've brought up here is to do with the merchant tailors' feast of 1607. So they put on a feast, and they invited King James I and his son and heir, the Prince of Wales, Prince Henry, to this extraordinary feast. I think they probably didn't know he was actually going to come. They invited all the great and the good, so there are lots of dukes and earls and members of other livery companies, the Lord Mayor, all those people. And because they were showing off, they bought every single expensive food you could possibly think of, salmon and herons and peacocks, remarkably owls and cuckoos. I can't find a recipe for cooking a cuckoo.
I've never seen a cuckoo recipe. I've seen a mention of somebody eating an owl. Charles Darwin ate an owl in the Glutton Club. That's the only case I've ever come across. You don't know eat a carnivore. There's something weird about eating a carnivore, isn't there? Something that just makes me recoil slightly.
The thing that's remarkable about this feast is it's definitely showing off to the king. We are so wealthy that we can provide this for you. What was extraordinary about this particular feast, I reckon it was, apart from a coronation banquet, it must have been the most expensive feast per head ever, really. Millions of pounds on a single feast. They hired Ben Jonson, who, apart from Shakespeare, was the greatest playwright of his generation, to write something that some small boys who were lowered down from a ship that was suspended from the ceiling would say this bit of poetry praising James I. Music was played. Music was specially written for the occasion. But what must have been very galling for the merchant tailors was that James I refused to sit in the hall with everybody else. And they knew this was going to happen, so they had to adapt the hall to accommodate him. So they basically knocked a hole in the wall so he could sit in a private room with a few other guests and look through a window at everybody else eating down below. He seemed to be terrified of assassination or poisoning. The garden outside, they increased the height of the wall. Okay. So nobody, not even the houses overlooking the hall, could look in on this feast. And the food must have been extraordinary. I imagine there must have been an enormous amount of wastage, actually. And as with lots of livery company archives, they hire in people to do the cooking, and they also hire in equipment like glasses and plates. And often the livery companies then have to list how much was smashed. And sometimes the livery companies, the breakages were extraordinary, like 50% of things was... So in my head... They've drunk too much and a gunfight starts, you know?
Yeah. Rowdy men together.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's I'd quite like to investigate this feast in more detail at some point. It's a fascinating thing.
It sounds amazing. That ship is ridiculous.
Yes.
The ship with the clapboards in it.
Yes.
I love it, though. We have a couple of books here that I asked, mainly because I just wanted to hold them in my hands, if nothing else.
Yes.
Got a couple of books here by the eminent and learned Kenneth Digby, brackets Knight,
Yes.
17th century. So we're in the 17th century now. And
Is he Kenneth?
is it Kenham? Did I say Kenneth?
You did, yes. Do you want to say that again?
No, we'll leave your correction in. I don't mind looking like a fool.
Yeah, well, I thought you. I doubted whether. I thought you know more than I do, actually.
No, Kenham. I think. Do you know? I may have misread it the first time I ever came across him.
And you can't forget it.
I think I have
now.
to correct myself,
Yes.
and I forgot then. He's a very interesting fellow. Obviously a knight. Chums with James I, I believe, actually.
Yes.
And Ben Jonson. I'm not sure if he wrote a herbal, but he was very interested in books and travelled around the parts of the New World. One of the things I've become very interested in recent though is because I've been looking at fermentation, and about a quarter of his book is different. There's many recipes of mead and metheglin and those sorts of things. It's a book that tells you so many interesting details, and as this has cropped up as we've been talking on and off camera for the last couple of hours. It's people writing things down that they don't know it's interesting.
Yes, exactly.
But it turns out to be interesting.
And also, he's got a voice, hasn't he? Which, we have been talking off microphone about several writers, and it's interesting. It's the ones that have a voice to them that we can, like Elizabeth David, whether we like it or not, and Fanny Craddock, or Hannah Glasse, you can actually feel the character coming through them, can't you? You know?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Now, I haven't cooked, I think I've maybe cooked one or two recipes by him. And I'm curious to know whether his recipes actually work. I've got a feeling that they do, though, because he was keeping them for his own personal records.
Yes.
I think it's a servant of his published it posthumously. So it's not like he was writing this big book of, like, this is how to cook, everyone, because I'm so great. It was for his own and his house's use. Do you think
the fact that there's a lot in there about distilling, etc., is because that's quite high status in a house, isn't it? You know, it's quite often the mistress of the house will be distilling, even making beer within the household, if it was a country household. And when you look at manuscript books, you can link to a particular household. There's often a whole section, isn't there, that's to do with distilling and making medicines, but particularly distilling, because the mistress was doing it herself.
That's right.
Whereas the cooking was being done by the servants quite often.
Yes, that is the case. So Ken Digby's wife will have been doing this, and I don't know, maybe he was a bit annoying sticking his nose in with all this stuff. Sometimes I do feel like a lot of these... Going back to the Middle Ages, there's the Goodman of Paris who's definitely sticking his nose in.
Yes.
Again, very useful that he did for us now, but I wonder how annoying some of these blokes were sticking their own.
And some of those late 16th century English cookbooks have got a man's name on. Are they just a man's name stuck on a book that's a woman gathered all those recipes? We don't know, do we?
Yes, we'll probably never know. No. Those original manuscripts knocking around, probably not. But one thing we should mention here is the little inlay. Yeah,
so this is a book plate, which we Guildhall Library, they would put book plates in, sometimes created for a particular collection. This one is actually a donation book plate, and it's dated 1901, and it says presented by Mrs. Staples, which is really significant for the history of food at the library, because her husband, Thomas Staples, was essentially a caterer to the City of London. He had a tavern, which is about 300 yards from here, down the road, and he was a member of the Cook's Company, the Cook's Guild. I believe he was the master, and he'd done catering for Lord Mayor's Banquet for other companies, and he collected old recipe and cookery books. And there is another one, which we'll come to in a minute, another man who was also doing that at the same time. I don't know of anybody else who was collecting old recipe books in the middle of the 19th century as recipe books. People would collect them as objects. So if you wanted the earliest cookery book printed in England, 1500, you'd like that in your collection. You probably never look at what the text says, or if it's by a famous, and people would collect Kenelm Digby, not because it's a cookery book, but because it's by Kenelm Digby. But I can't think of anybody else who was collecting recipe books. And he wasn't just collecting contemporary recipe books, he was collecting antiquarian recipe books.
Yeah.
And when he died, that collection came very quickly to us. So I think it definitely was his, and it wasn't his wife's. She didn't hang on to it. It came here very
I'm
quickly.
not dusting these books anymore. I'm getting rid.
Yes. And they, along with a small library that came from the Cook's Company themselves, were the foundation of the food collections at Guildhall Library, upon which, through donation mostly, it's built up to the biggest collection in any public library in the country. Obviously, the copyright libraries like the British Library and Bodleian will have larger ones, but I like to say that we're a public library, so anybody can come and see them without...
Well, you also seem to have the added value of having so many accompanying bits of material that the British Library could never get their hands on.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to Elizabeth David and
things
like that, but we'll get on to that. One other one, again, that I've chosen here is The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy. Now, this is a cookbook where the recipes don't work.
Yes.
But again, it's like you mentioned before, it's her voice.
Yes.
She writes with authority.
Yes.
And she captures the foods that are being eaten at the time, which is the most important thing. And you can get an idea of how the things were made, even if you sit down and try and recreate it, it doesn't quite work. I won't bore listeners by retelling the story of when I did her Yorkshire Christmas pie.
Okay.
Because it was a disaster, and they've heard it several times before. I'll maybe tell you about it later. She's important in my research at the moment because I found 2 examples of wild fermentation, which the English apparently never did.
Okay.
She makes a fermented flummery from oat flour.
Okay.
And she makes sauerkraut.
Oh, goodness. I didn't know that.
Well, before sauerkraut was even a thing. Now, I'm not saying sauerkraut was being cooked all across the country all of a sudden, but her book was being purchased all over the country
for bestseller, definitely.
For decades and decades and decades.
Yes.
So I like to think that a few people at least had a go at making some sauerkraut, even if it never really caught on.
And also, she's not like Mrs. Beeton, who, not Mrs. Beeton herself, but Mrs. Beeton in later editions after she had died. It turned into something where it has to be so comprehensive that it includes parrots and things like that, by 1906.
Yeah.
Whereas this is not meant to be comprehensive, is it? So including something like that probably indicates that people were actually doing it, making sauerkraut, rather than we've got to include everything in an encyclopedia, even if we never do them.
In fact, going back to the Yorkshire Christmas pie recipe, I think it's there because they're quite new, and you can tell that they're new because she explains what they are and to whom they were sent and things like that. So obviously it's quite a fancy thing. It's like, yes, this is the kind of thing that's in a pie. Yes. That's not the important thing. The important thing is I'm telling you about this amazingly ostentatious fancy pie that you might have heard about. So I think that's really why it's in the book. For example,
before we just say one thing about the book plate in this copy. Yes. So this again has a book plate, and this is from Robert Miller, who, like Staples, was collecting cookery books. So between them, they had a really interesting collection of cookery books, which came into the collection. He was also, I think, master of the Cook's Company and was something of a caterer. So we owe them a great debt of the collection.
People who needed to know their stuff, so you're assuming they've got a good eye.
Yeah, I don't know whether they bought them at auction. Where did they get? Maybe just to second-hand bookshops, and nobody was buying them, so they could pick up a Hannah Glasse for a few pence in the 19th century. Yeah.
People using them as doorstops or stop their tables wobbling, that kind of thing. Now, we've got a very important one coming up next. There's the Elizabeth David collection, isn't there? So how and why did Elizabeth David become attached to the library, and how did you manage to get hold, or did the library manage to get hold of
so if you take
so
a
many
step
things?
Back, somebody important to mention is André Simon.
Yes, of course, yes.
Who apparently did research at the older Guildhall Library, the Victorian building, and obviously liked it here because when he founded the Wine and Food Society, they started gathering together a library, and he wanted it given to Guildhall Library, and it arrived here, which then attracted attention to the sort of Cinderella collections we had before that. It was a big collection, and so people started giving us cookery books. And when Elizabeth David was in her old age, you might say, in the 1970s into the 80s, when she was getting older, her books became more and more dense with historical research, So particularly the book on English bread and yeast cookery and the book on Harvest of the Cold Months.
Yes.
So she had to go to history libraries to do the research, and she came here to Guildhall Library. The story is that she came on Saturdays quite often. We used to be open on Saturdays then. She would arrive just before we opened, and it is said that she'd bring a bottle of wine with her, a bottle of white wine, in a string bag that she would lower into the pond, which is just still out. There's still a pond just outside.
Oh, really? Okay.
To chill, would come in. She would order the book she wanted and then pop out to have her lunch with this chilled bottle of wine and some sandwiches she brought. I thought this was a myth until Jill Norman, her friend and executor, said she used to do it with her. It's true. It's a true story. So she did her research here like André Simon did. And when she died in 1992, I think it was, before the famous auction that sold off everything, her antiquarian cookery books, so those older ones, mostly 17th to 19th century, went to the Warburg Institute in her will. The rest, I think in her will says, offered them to Guildhall Library, but we had to buy them. We were invited to go to a house in Halsey Street to buy them for a set price. We never bought cookery books because we're a Library of London history, although it's in part of London history.
Yeah.
So we bought them for quite a large sum, thinking it was a large sum. In fact, it was a bargain.
Okay.
When we know that, a pot full of wooden spoons went for £200 in the sale. Everything that was associated with her.
Yes, the name, so important.
Prudie bought the kitchen table, I think it was, for some enormous £1,100 or something.
Okay.
So we got a bargain. Her books arrived, and when they were catalogued, we found lots of post-it notes in them, lots of letters that people had written to her, requests for her to review things, loads of gushing letters from someone somewhere saying, "Oh, you're so wonderful," which she probably quite enjoyed, And we've preserved all of those little notes.
What we have here is something from the Elizabeth David collection. It's unexpected. We've got Cooking with Can and Pack by Fanny and Johnny Craddock. How has this come to be part of the Elizabeth David collection? It's not the kind of book I would expect her to have had on her shelf.
Yes, so alongside all her something like 900 books were hundreds of pamphlets and sort of ephemeral things. And it seems to be that the person who published this book at the Museum Press sent a copy to Elizabeth David asking her to review it. Now, we know about Fanny Craddock and Elizabeth David. They're a sort of antithesis, really, of cooking. Yes. Fanny and Johnny were TV celebs at this point in the late 50s, I think this probably was. And why we'd ask Elizabeth David of all people, but I suppose she was the most high-profile non-TV food writer. And so inside it, on some sort of rough paper, was Elizabeth David's review, handwritten, and it was her first thoughts and then her crossings out, in which she sort of tried to be kind to a book that she thought was probably terrible, because it's cooking with leftovers, which I don't think Elizabeth David would have ever written a book called Cooking with Leftovers. When
we were having a little flick through, there was a chapter on potato crisp cookery.
Yeah, using potato crisps.
She definitely would not have been happy about that.
She probably never had, unless it was with game chips she might have eaten, but not.
Yeah, she's probably had a game chip.
Yes, but not potato crisp.
I can't imagine opening a bag of Walker's salt and vinegar somehow.
No. So in her review, she does have a line where she says, "Fanny and Johnny are our favourite TV cooks," which is sort of passive-aggressive, isn't it, really? "Take what is essentially a good idea to the point of dementia," she says.
Gosh.
And then she crossed it out. And so far as we know, she never finished this review and sent it off for publication.
I bet the editor saw it and just thought, we asked the wrong person here.
So in her notes, you do find little references just on a little yellow Post-it note. This man knows nothing. This person's a phony. Something like, what? Sugar in Roman times? Exclamation mark. All those sorts of things that she came across, but also little references to, like, mention of ice in London in 1760. It's clearly she's making these little notes for something she's got in mind in the future, but also her opinion of people.
Yes, and
she could be quite cruel.
And she had opinions.
Yes.
That is for sure. Yeah. Yes, and I'm sure she obviously would have had opinions before she read this book about Fanny Craddock. I think, Fanny was a fan of Elizabeth.
Yes.
But it was not reciprocated. I think
As far
that's
as we
fair.
know,
Well, that's fair
yes.
to say, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Yes. I think, I'd been told by Jill Norman that if Fanny Craddock came into Elizabeth David's shop, Elizabeth David would hide in the stock cupboard until she'd gone.
Oh, I really like Fanny Craddock.
Yeah.
The more I find out about her, the more I appreciate her.
Yes.
You know, I think she was a nightmare. But
Yes.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Just as an amazing businesswoman, I'm not sure how well the business is actually fared, but I find her an infinitely interesting
Yes.
character. I need to try and stop thinking of her as a character, but as a real human
Yes.
being. But it's very difficult because she created the
She's
character
quite
so
artificial,
well.
like her food, wasn't she? It was all a creation. Yeah.
Yes, but I must admit I've not really cooked many Fanny Craddock recipes, but Kevin Geddes has, Sam Bilton has, and she was making real recipes for real housewives.
And she was
to
doing
really
it live
reproduce.
often, wasn't she?
Yeah, you're not going to make a souffle in front of 800 people at the Albert Hall and not be able to make the thing.
No, in a ball gown.
Yeah, whilst in a ball gown, yes.
Yeah.
So she knew what she was
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of snobs, Elizabeth David included, who kind of poo-pooed her at the time.
Yes.
And then when she died, I think people piled on a bit to be even more cruel now she was gone. And I think in the last maybe 15 years, I think she's being rehabilitated a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if anything, Elizabeth David is being whatever the opposite of
definitely.
rehabilitated.
She's being knocked off her pedestal, definitely. Yeah.
Which I think she needs to be. She's amazing, and I use her stuff, especially the English bread and yeast cookery. I mean, it's an amazing book. I'm not necessarily knocking that, but the way she's disparaging about our food, especially working class food and things like that, I do find it a little bit offensive. And I remember when I first started reading hers, I remember really taking note, trying to learn from her. Then as the years have gone on,
yes,
I just
exactly.
thought, hang on a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going a bit far here. We've got a very small, what looks like more a pamphlet with a sort of metal cover.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like a metal cover.
It's sort of quite Art Deco looking. In a way. Yeah, it looks like it's almost made of aluminium, shiny, silvery cover. And it's from the Isobar. It's called the Isobar, which was a bar in the building known as Lawn Road Flats in Hampstead, also known as the Isocon building, designed in the 1930s as very posh little flats for fairly posh people who could afford to live in Hampstead and probably had another house somewhere in the country. And the interesting thing about that building was most of the flats were sort of for bachelors or single women maybe, and they didn't really have proper kitchens. They had a little cupboard in which there was a sink and maybe one ring, because the idea was that you dined out every day, or you could go and dine in a sort of communal restaurant, I suppose you call it, in the basement, where there was also a bar. And the reason this came to the library's collections via Christopher Driver, who worked on the Good Food Guide and died quite young, and I think it was his widow who gave us his books. So this little book is essentially just a bar menu, but it has a really interesting introduction to it, saying that the Isobar was founded in 1937. And the sort of people who lived there, Agatha Christie lived there, Raymond Postgate, who was the founder of the Good Food Guide, lived there and was really interested in food. He probably was the driving force behind the food there. Raymond Postgate's the father of Oliver Postgate.
I was going to say,
who's one of my heroes,
yes,
Oliver Postgate. Of course. Yeah. So what's really interesting in it, there's a little paragraph says, in the Isobar, in the restaurant, in the club, the pepper in the mills is Teller cherry pepper. The bread is made to the Isobar recipe from stone ground flour. The coffee is blended to the Isobar formula. And then it particularly mentions Valencia rice and pâté de foie gras. So it's talking about things that have origins to them. Where are these foods coming from? Might be, Himalayan pink salt, for instance.
Yeah.
It's talking about food in a way that people have accredited Elizabeth David as introducing in the 50s, when in fact this is the 1930s. People are concerned about what the origin, and they want the best of a pepper or a salt, etc. So I think it goes against that idea that Elizabeth David.
Well, Elizabeth's
those things.
Most famous, infamous comment regarding that is, of course, that olive oil was only available in chemist shop to unblock your ears.
Yeah.
But on the list here, very clear, is virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
In the 1930s.
And actually mentioning virgin olive oil, I don't think I saw that in Sainsbury's until the 1980s, virgin olive oil. I can't really remember it before then. But clearly people who knew where to get it could get it. But it also mentioned salsify, for instance.
I do like salsify.
Yeah.
for those that don't know, salsify, it's an obscure vegetable now, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a very sort of long, thin root vegetable.
Yeah.
It must be I guess it's just never been adaptable to modern farming because you can't tear those out of fields, can you? They just break
it's
up.
Delicious,
so I guess it's delicious.
Really delicious,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. People say it tastes of oysters.
I've never known it tastes
but
of
it is nice,
oysters.
kind of subtle, like sweet vegetable. Yes, but I've never picked up on the ozone flavour. But no, that's fascinating. And just I didn't know anything about this.
Philip Harben used to cook there, and he was probably the second TV chef to appear on TV. The first was Marguerite Patton.
That's right, of course it was, yes.
When they did the experiments for the BBC in 36, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then he was on the telly. I remember him as a child, seeing him cook live on television, looking like a cook. He looked like he enjoyed his food.
Yep.
He had a lovely manner. Sadly, he died relatively young, but he wrote some good books. I think there's a really nice book about traditional British baking, I think it is.
Yeah, he seems like a very fascinating character as well. There's one clip, this is a false memory, maybe it's just stills that I've seen, but I'm sure I've seen a clip where he's doing some Tudor food. He's dressed up as Henry VIII. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think you're right,
Is that right? That thing?
Yeah. I think he did dress up to cook. And because it was live, and they just used to have a gas stove in the middle of a studio with no props, and he'd be standing virtually with his back to you as the souffle fell, and he said, well, it should look like this. So he was never flustered, but he was great TV, actually.
Well, what's this last one?
Oh, yeah, I don't think I showed you this one.
I'm not primed for this one, right?
No, sorry.
Never mind.
So this is something that I sort of discovered on the shelves. It's called the Tre Trattati by Geiger, I think his name is. 1639. This was published across Europe. So essentially, it's a book with carving instructions, which you may recognise when I show them to you.
I think I know what it's going to be. I think I might be excited. But go on.
So these are carving instructions for carving various. Looks like a hair being carved out. They're rather graphic. They look like surgery.
It's like Grey's Anatomy.
Yes. So this was published across Europe. It originated, I think, in Germany, and in fact was published as a pack of playing cards as well. So you could get playing cards with these carving instructions. And what it also contains, that one's particularly gruesome, showing a hair being chopped in half. It includes instructions for, say, holding napkins or serviettes, depending on how you want to name them, into remarkable shapes like ships and things.
Yeah, full galleon.
But in fact, I've looked at these instructions carefully, and you can't find it. The instructions are not all there. There's allegedly somebody who goes around Europe folding napkins today for museum displays on food who can create these.
Wow,
animals.
A Labrador murdog.
Yes, double-headed eagles. So this was a sort of bestseller. I think, again, it's about showing off. But this carving reminds me of the Book of Carving, that very early one.
Yes.
Where they list all those ways
the whole vocabulary.
I think that's a fiction, all that stuff.
Do you think?
I think some of them are still around, like break the heron, I think.
Dismember the heron.
Yeah, splat the pike.
Splat the pike, that's one that I always remember as well.
I think if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, quite often the only use of that word is in that book, in that context.
Robert May lists them in his book as well, does he? So it's really, it's passed around a lot,
it's passed around, but I don't think anybody ever said, can you splat that pike for me? I think it's a secret language. The carver, in a royal household, there'd be a carver who might have said, my lord, I will splat the pike for you, but I don't
dismember my heron.
Yeah, I don't think people. It's like collective nouns. How many people use some of those collective?
Yeah, they're
nouns?
just kind of fun to create.
I think it was exclusive words for exclusive, and they weren't used. But anyway, I always love this book, and people are always quite excited by the gruesome.
They really are gruesome. I'll take a couple of images of these for people, and they can have a look on the website. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much for indulging me.
Good. Yeah.
For this extra conversation about the amazing things. And not only that, because of your knowledge, it really puts everything in its actual place with
Yes.
social history, who was interacting
Yes.
with the document,
Yes.
where it sits in society. It's,
Yeah.
it's not just, they're all beautiful objects in themselves. Maybe not so much Fanny and Johnny Craddock,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
the other ones. But you're giving us such an insight into, into the meaning of the document.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And just to reiterate that everyone is welcome to come and look at this material at Guildhall Library.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Thank you very much, Peter. There are lots of links in the show notes to Peter's book, more information about the Guildhall Library, and most of the books, anyway, that we discuss. There's also a link to Chalk History Festival 2026, because Peter will be appearing there on the 27th of June at 11 a.m, talking about Georgian feasting. And there's a link to those obscure carving terms we talked about towards the end of the chat. There's plenty of other things in the show notes too, like a list of pertinent podcast episodes, such as Fanny Craddock with Kevin Geddes, and early TV cookbooks and tie-ins, also with Kevin Geddes. Both episodes feature Fanny Craddock, but the last one also includes Philip Harben. There are the episodes featuring Jill Norman, and 18th century women cookery writers with Thomas Ntinas of The Delicious Legacy. We also discussed Fanny Craddock on a recent episode of A is for Apple, so check that out as well. There's a blog post, in fact it was the first ever blog post I wrote on BritishFoodHistory.com called Charles Darwin and the Owl, which is my account of him eating a tawny owl at the infamous Glutton Club. Now, do you have anything to add after listening to today's episode, or have you visited the Guildhall Library for your own research? Please do get in touch and tell me about it. Email me at neil@britishfoodhistory.com, or leave a comment on YouTube, the Spotify app, the accompanying blog post, or find me on social media. I'm at Neil Buttery on Twitter and Blue Sky, or Dr_Neil_Buttery on Instagram and Threads. And there's also the Facebook group on facebook.com/groups/British Food History. Links are in the show notes. Please support the podcast by leaving a review or giving it a rating on your favourite podcast app. A 5-star rating would be really well appreciated, thank you. And if you can support the podcast and blogs financially, well, I would be ever so grateful. If you go to the Blogstroke website, you can donate a one-off virtual coffee or pint, or start up a £3 monthly subscription. That's about $4.50 US. In return, you will get access to the secret podcast, bonus blog posts, a monthly newsletter, and more. And everything I receive goes into making more content. Go to BritishFoodHistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab, where you can find out about each and every benefit of becoming a subscriber. But it's time to go now. The mixing and sound engineering was done by Thomas Ntinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Until next time, please do take care of yourselves. Cheerio.